Hello, and welcome back to On the Soul's Terms podcast. I'm your host today, Brian Clark, and it's my pleasure to welcome a special guest, a bard who brings the stories of our life to life. Someone you know, someone you value for his gift of engaging us with myth, folklore, yarns, and other imaginable ways. Guess who? Chris Skidmore. Now, for the past year, Chris has been our compere and guide for a magical mystery tour of the 12 astrological houses. So today, as we come to the end of our track, a track that's taken us through the topography of these 12 soul regions, let's reflect back on our journey. So welcome, Chris. Good day. And how would you like to begin the reflection?
Well, firstly, thank you, Brian. And just to speak on behalf of your followers and fans out there, it's about time you had a podcast. Um, so it's wonderful to have you as my host today. And yeah, I mean, I guess to start with, it's just like acknowledging the interesting feeling of being on this side of the tables being turned in this way. And I just want to acknowledge that there's some excitement about that, some trepidation, a little bit of a little bit of an awkward feeling about being on this side. And now I get to know what it's like to be over here, as you have been for me on so many times on the podcast. So I should, firstly, just stating that of like, wow, this feels odd to be over here, but also exciting. And yeah, where to begin? I don't know. I never know. That's kind of like the podcast itself, isn't it? Like the journey through the houses began with the Fool, and the image is he's walking with his dog off a cliff, carrying a little sachet, and he's about to fall into the great river of life. And that's what it has been. It has been a journey of the Fool. And I think I've gone along this journey with the Fool. A lot of questions, a lot of questioning. I didn't go out to tell people about the houses, let's put it that way. I didn't go out to teach people about the houses. I went on the journey because I didn't know anywhere that I could go to inhabit them. And so I wanted to go and inhabit them myself and see what they actually are, because it was almost like all I had to go off was textbooks and all my studies and that kind of thing. And, you know, like lots of beautiful work out there. But I don't feel like I was ever encouraged to just like really live inside places and then see what was there and have a look around, pick up dust off the old books in that place, or, see what the entrance is and feel what the place is like. So that was always the intention, not to teach about them, but to experience them myself and with my guests and with the fairy tales. And then hopefully that would just kind of like seep out into the airwaves and people could also join me in there.
Well, I think it has, and I think one of the things you're saying that's important is learning in community. See, what you're talking about really is that experiential learning, which of course it can happen through a book because a book can inspire us. But you're talking about an experiential way of learning, which is, to me, at the heart of astrology. I want to go back to you're sitting on the other side, just to start that, Chris. Here you are sitting on the other side. And it reminds me of maybe what we're doing now is going back through the houses. You know, we're reflecting back. Those two ways of looking at houses, you know, that sense of moving once the wheel stops moving through the sense of the sweet sequence of the houses. But now we can also inhabit the rising. You know, you're inhabiting that different way now of looking at things. You know, you're being reflective. Being now having to hold this. At least I hope you're not having to hold
Yeah.
that. So let's talk a little bit then about that sense of learning in community and that sense of the Fool. So what happened when you stepped off the cliff? Did you that those wings that the Fool has in this garment, did they gently let you land in the territory? Because you mentioned that in the first, and then you moved on to Rumpelstiltskin. didn't you? You told the fairy tale of Rumpelstiltskin.
Yeah, I did. Well, firstly, I talked to you, and and that was a beautiful way to sort of glide down from the cliff into the river, I think, because the way that we talked together about the houses to give us a sense of, I mean, we set out like the fool, like we always do, Brian. I think we set out to talk about all 12, didn't we? I believe, and then we realized halfway, or we realized about an hour in that that wasn't going to be possible in the space of one episode, which meant that we talked about the first six, and that was actually a beautiful way to sort of like send out the pigeon or something, send out the bird to look at the landscape, just to get a sense of where I was going, and then step again into the river. So get like a little bit of a vision of what this river looks like from above, and then step off. And then, yeah, we went into Rumpelstiltskin, and I think that was the image of spinning, as you said, is spinning the yarn. And you mentioned in your intro, which was a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much. But you mentioned the spinning of the yarn and the spinning of tales and the spinning of gold, in a sense that the maiden, which is really, there were so many maidens in my stories, in my fairy tales, many more, much more maidens than there were youths, although there was the occasional youth. But
It's very
yeah,
important, isn't it, to start off with that image of spinning, because even though you might not have been conscious of that, which is always what that's why we're the fool, because the fool. But that starting off with that idea of spinning, and as you said, the strong to the gold. There's the alchemical images that are embedded in these fairy tales, and they are, to me, such a way of describing throughout what you did was describing the fate that we encounter in each of these houses. The spinning, because it's always been an image of fate, and you could think about what we spin in each house. So how did you feel about that once you started telling the fairy tale? How did you feel when you were telling these fairy tales?
well, I mean, actually, Rumpelstiltskin was a beautiful way to start, because in some ways, as much as I'm talking about like there's a certain ease in the process and I'm just wandering off a cliff and let's see how it goes, it was also there was a pressure, and there's a pressure in that fairy tale, of course, because the father has sort of declared that his daughter can do this, right? And then it gets her into trouble, which is always which is always the way. It was like something in me declared that I could go on a journey like this, and that got me into trouble. Now I have to start spinning, now I have to start spinning these tales, and there's a pressure to get the gold out. There's a pressure to make sure that this is, of course, you and I talk a lot about that Saturn in Virgo that we share, and that pressure to make it good and make it succinct and make it valuable for people and all of this stuff. I mean, it just clicks in for me no matter what. And yet when I relax into the spinning, and as you say, like then moving with yarn and moving with threads and moving with tapestries and the fates, the three fates, and then you start to drop into that image, gives you so much more, and actually gives you this. It actually gave me, in a sense, yeah, like a webbing or a safety net in the end. That was like, oh, I am being carried here. I think that was pretty early on. There was a realization or a recognition that this wasn't going to involve me putting in a ton of effort like that maiden at the spinning wheel. It was going to be me acknowledging that somewhere back there, someone, the fates, the moray, it could even be the hours or the seasons or the, over time, though, that will be spun, and the fate of these houses will be referred to probably from my unconscious. But I think that was what was relieving, in a sense, is that probably my unconscious would take care of something for me. Yeah.
Chris, you've just, put your finger on something that to me is so important in the study of astrology, is this acknowledgement of the unconscious. You described it so well. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, maybe even through the way that you spoke to guests. But I hear you saying that you have I wouldn't say it's unshakable, but you have certainly a strong faith that you will be guided if you give yourself in this way to the
Mm.
unconscious, to the story. Is this why the stories mean so much to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think all my life stories have meant a lot to me in a way. Um, in some ways, for better and worse. Dreams as well, you know, nightmares and dreams and early memories, and but it's like there's something embedded in stories that I don't know any other way to find, you know. And I am a seeker of wisdom and knowledge, and I do have a deep longing to know. But when I enter a realm of a story, I mean, it's interesting. You know, we call them fairy tales, and in German, I just got a message from a German listener today saying, if you need help pronouncing German, let me know, which I take as a bit of a nod that I haven't been doing so well.
Das ist nicht gut. Nicht gut.
Anyway, the word for the fairy tale in German, which I'm about to butcher, and I'm sorry to my German audience, is it's something like Zaubermärchen, and I'm sorry about that pronunciation, but the translation that a Swiss German friend of mine gave me once was that it was more like a conjuring tale. So there was something of the conjuring. And so then what I realize is that when a story is being conjured around me and I'm able to fully inhabit it like a dream, it's teaching me something that only it can teach me. So in the
Yeah.
way, there's a faith in the sense that I do believe in the unconscious and its ability to teach, and I do believe in the unconscious being wiser than my consciousness, right? Wiser than my ego, wiser than myself. And yeah, so I want to meet it halfway. I want to step forward into it, and I want to find out what it is trying to teach me or us, or all of us, really. You know.
Well, you certainly did that. I'd like to know which fairy tale. Let's just. I want you to go back. Just think about the ones you told us.
Mm.
And as you were telling them, was something conjured in you as you were actually telling? Because isn't that the way that when you speak of something, it actually arises in us, and and you're holding those two parts. So, is there one that have you got an example of one that you told that something conjured something in you?
Well, the first that springs to mind, and that's often the one to go with, is actually in the ninth house, the juniper tree
Uh,
story.
yeah.
That story is one that I didn't know before beginning this journey,
Yeah.
and it was violent and sort of gruesome. But dreams are like that too, right? I mean,
Of course they are.
yeah, there's often horrific things happening in dreams, and so there's something healing about being in touch with the horrific. It's sort of like Pan and the beauty and the terror being involved in the one being always felt quite satisfying to me. And there was something about the image of the tree itself and the bones of this boy being buried by the sister, little Marlinchen, who buries the bones under the tree, and who weeps, who basically spends the entire story weeping until joy comes out at the end because she gets her beautiful red shoes.
Yeah.
But the image of the bones of the boy being buried under the tree, and then somehow magically that tree turns out to be a magic tree and forms this beautiful bird, and who has this voice and can sing, and sings not of the beauty of the world but of the horror. But everybody wants to hear the song because they can see the beauty in the song and wants to give to the song, wants to invest in the song. I think there's something about that, like Beauty and the Beast or Beauty and
Yeah.
Terror, and putting them together, and just because we're in a world that's like that, you know, it's a terrifying place,
Yeah.
and we're all trying to get on the side of something beautiful. And I think it's sort of like, so this story brought forward something in me of that beautiful bird
Mm.
who finds voice not by singing about something pretty, but singing about the truth. This is what
Yeah.
happened. He just says, "This is what happened," you know?
Well, the birds sung the song of the soul, didn't it, in a way?
The song of the soul, yeah.
And the beauty and the terror are part of the hybrid of our being. And I'm curious myself. You see, every fairy tale conjures up something for us. It speaks to us, and so. But that theme of sibling too, that wove itself through many of the fairy tales.
Indeed, yeah.
The fate of that, the fate of sibling, the fate of family, the fate of relationship, and all those, of course, were discovered as you moved away through the particular houses. So, can you tell us another perhaps story from doing this inside yourself, a particular house that you found yourself in that revealed something for you
Yeah.
without being too personal, but as personal as you'd like to be?
I mean, the honest truth in that to answer that is that that was the remarkable element of the journey is that each house was doing that. But I would say that the journey, there was a moment in Hansel and Gretel that I've been reflecting on this morning where they have to go single file over the lake on a white duck, I think, or a white swan or something, some bird of the water that can take them over, and they can only go individually. And I feel like that took me over the threshold of the IC into the fourth. And there
Mm.
was something about that midnight point in the chart that, and of course, that led to a wonderful conversation with Melanie that, is one of the most listened to of the whole series, the fourth house IC conversation that we had. And something about that of the root system, it really clicked for me. It took me into the hidden realm of the fourth house that I'd never really fully comprehended. I don't think, or not that you can fully comprehend that. It's probably the wrong wording, but I didn't have a feel for that house until I had sort of crossed over on that duck or swan or whatever it is, crossed over the deep lake and wandered into that other world alone,
Mm.
and then felt the truth of the root system that was so much bigger than my personal family. You know what I mean? It felt much
Of
more
course.
broad than that, much more like my connection to the human consciousness or something. The unconscious, maybe. I don't know. But something about that movement over from the third into the fourth, I found quite remarkable.
Mm.
And it occurred at a moment in my journey, which was also a very remarkable moment in the year around the solstice, the June solstice, where so much moved in my life. Just as I was moving over that threshold, yeah,
You, you,
connected to
you-
something very powerful.
yeah. Well, you've articulated for us the felt experiences. I think when you use astrology in this way, where you've talked about an angle, of course, which is of course a very powerful point, and I'd like to go back here in a minute. But every house cusp, we open can have this, and I noticed that you did that, especially in certain times, like you lingered between the 11th and the 12th.
Yeah.
You lingered between the fourth and the fifth. So there was lingerings that you did on the house cusp or on an angle, which becomes very powerful
Mm.
because there's always a transition. It's like uh, closing one door and opening another. But let's go back to that transition. Of course, we couldn't have anybody better than Melanie to um, evoke this depth of water in these particular houses. But it was as if you were describing a kind of a process of individuation. You talked about the brother and sister being obviously characters in our own individuation process that are very important. They had to cross the river themselves, and they entered into this new territory. So how would you describe this territory now? If you were now that you've been there, felt that, how are you going to describe that? You're going to write it. You're writing writing a syllabus. You have to describe the fourth house. How are you now going to describe that?
God, I mean, I would I would try to not describe it. Firstly, I'd maybe try to evoke it, because it's like I almost want to point at it. I will almost want to point to the soles of the feet. I think to start with,
Uh-huh.
the soles of the feet, and and what is
Not the
happen,
soul in the feet, but the
or the
soles of
sole in the feet and the soles in the feet. Yeah, yeah. Um, and feel like go down there and actually feel that just as you can feel from your hands, there's energy coming out of your hands all the time, right? Like if you feel it, you can feel that. I mean, anyone that can feel that. That's
yeah,
what helps us to connect with the world around us, helps us to reach out for each other. And we shake hands or, these kinds of things. Well, what are we doing when we shake hands? It's like, I think that's an ancient ritual there of an energy intertwining with another energy, just to say for a moment, like, oh, this is what I feel like, and that's what you feel like. And also, there's energy coming out of the soles of the feet. And there's something of like, that's the furthest away from the mind and the brain or whatever, the brain. It's the furthest away. And if you move your thinking mind down to there, and then the angle that your feet are at are down into the earth, and then you can move through the soil, which is also the soul, right? Like the soles of the feet connect to the soil of the land,
yeah,
and then down into some hidden root system that's underneath that may take you back to the earthly realms, or may take you back to your fishtail that you lost along the way. That's also an image that shows up a lot. They take you to the depth of the unconscious. And then I would say, at that point, it's important to breathe because things that are in the basement down there are, there are things down there in the IC, I think, that they're in the basement that we've got to move through. Kind of like this is where we might find the first inklings that there's a minotaur in the middle of this labyrinth.
yeah,
That there's something
yeah.
scary, and I
Mm.
think that's when we sort of like have to move with that. And that to me is the IC, you know,
Yeah. Well,
something like
well,
that.
well, you see, well, there's many things that come to mind. Just let me see if I could be succinct. One is that you have described, the evoking astrology rather than explaining it, and to evoke it, you're doing what you do as a podcast. It's oral, and astrology is an oral tradition because it goes back before the alphabet and the written word.
Hmm.
And you also brought this beautiful word, the roots. And it reminded me, of course, of Rumi's poem called Return to Your Soul. So we talk about the soul and the soil, but he says at the beginning of that poem, for ages you have come and gone, courting this delusion. For ages you have run from the pain and forfeited the ecstasy. So come, return to the root of your own soul. So what I heard you saying in many ways is that um, the IC is like inviting us to return to that primordial sense of who we are before there's any kind of, it's returning to the root of our own soul, which I think that you do, Chris, very, very well. And it's through the oral tradition. you know,
Hmm.
there's so much to speak about. I wanted to also, I loved the one that you did on the Four Mountains.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because now that wasn't a fairy tale, that was Chris's fairy tale. Oh,
Yeah.
when I heard that, I thought, oh, I loved how you took the myth and the stories of the mountains. And of course, the ninth house is a great image, isn't it, for a mountain? You climb,
Yeah.
climb it. But what I want to say about it is that you drew a very literal image of topography for that house,
Yeah.
and the topography of that house, and but also the multiplicity of that house. How did you feel about that when you did that whole one on the mountains?
I loved that episode. I'm going to be honest. I
Mhm.
loved that
Yeah,
episode. It
yeah,
was I I think what was relieving for my own ninth house,
yeah,
which is
yeah,
busy and does its thing, is that there was a deep permission granted to myself and hopefully to those out there listening, that these aren't mountains you need to climb. These aren't mountains. This is ninth house, not 10th. That
yeah,
these are mountains, and there's ways up there that are through Pegasus or through
mm,
flying creatures, eagles,
yeah,
the
yeah,
Aquila, or whoever it is. They can take you there,
yeah,
and you don't have to be. It's kind of like we don't have to be industrious for this one. We can be dreamers. We can just let our consciousness and our psyches move to these places, and so giving these mountains some voice and some air, and so that it was almost like, yeah, I remember moving into those mountains, like being with the muses and
yeah,
experiencing what that mountain felt like, and the spring, and that there was so much capacity for human creativity just sitting there in that mountain, like the lofty places. I felt wonderful about that one.
yeah, yeah. Oh, you said it. I loved what you said about like you didn't say you had to go there, but I heard we have to go there because the ninth house is exactly that, is recognizing in life the actual help that's coming from worlds beyond. Because
Mhm.
by the time you get to the ninth, we're sort of now into this other divine realm, aren't we? It's the help that comes from the divine realm.
Yeah.
And that reminded me, of course, of good Psyche. She's got all those little creatures helping her, but she also had the eagle, yeah,
Mm.
in the mountain.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was a wonderful way. And I think that this is what, I have a sense that you don't know what you do. And please, I think I've told you this before, please keep it that way because it allows you to speak about these things from a very, very rich source. It allows us to find our own images in it. When you tell
Mm.
stories, you're inviting us to find the images and find the stories in it. And so this again goes back to the evocation of it. What's another story that you love telling about the houses? Which another fairy tale or another, or what comes to mind?
I mean, it's interesting because we were just in the ninth, and I think another cusp I spent a lot of time at was the eighth and ninth cusp.
Yes.
Where I had
Yeah.
an interview with Travis Elliott, which was
Yeah.
wonderful about, the Asclepian tradition. And that's somewhere that you and I have spent a lot of
Yeah.
time discussing, and such a central part of my work, the Asclepian, like the healing arts is such a huge part of why I do this in the first place. And there was
Yeah.
something quite, in the story of the Raven in the eighth.
Hmm.
That was also a story that really worked on me for some months afterwards, after telling it. Like, it worked through me and into my living life. It showed me what the fairy tales can do if you just ponder them. Like, literally don't have to do anything except for sit with them every day or sit with them whenever they arise. And there was an image that came out through that story, where, the raven, she'd been turned into a raven, right? She was a young girl, baby actually, and she was just crying too much, and the mother cursed her and said, like, I wish you were a raven. The ravens flew by. She's like, oh, if you were a raven, and then boom,
Yeah.
the power of speech, the power of, like, oh God, I imagine how terrible the mother felt. She was just frustrated in a moment, and now her daughter's gone and is a raven. But the young boy, the youth that comes into that story, I had a lot of affinity with, because the ravens, basically, he wants to help her, right? He wants to help soul to find its way out of this form and into life, into a renewed place, which is very eighth house, the renewal. And she says, well, this is what you've got to do. You'll go to this house and she'll offer you food and drink and you just have to say no. And the boy, this is the sort of tragic moment of that boy. He says like, oh, that's easy. It's no problem for me to say no. And then the raven says, oh, you've already failed. She's crestfallen because she knows from his response that he hasn't sat with it. He hasn't been with it. He doesn't know. And so it'd be very easy for the witch to easily pull him into some drink or some food. And that was a very powerful story for me. That really lit up something of my own eighth house, I think, of my own tendency to stagnate or to go sleepy or to sort of like metaphorically accept the food or drink and then find myself asleep at 2:00. Beautifully eighth house cuspy story, isn't it? 2 p.m. he finds himself asleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the saying, in the sitting with it and the saying no, are those tools that we can use to enter the eighth house?
Yeah, because the eighth house is a place where there's going to be sirens and there's going to be components that offer you everything you've ever wanted and ultimately lull you into a sense of a sort of a sleepiness. And the idea of sleep itself is interesting, right? Because we come from this house into the sleep and the dream chambers and the healing of sleep. So must be something else. It must be something different than sleep, right? It must be something different than nourishment. We must fall into a sort of a slumber in a way, or like the next scene, you get these slumbering giants. So like the unconscious kind of what it is, like compulsions have taken over you, have taken over me. And I was like, oh, and I was helped through that. In a sense by my partner Maricel, who was able to name that part of the story and help me see a certain slumber that I was going into.
Yeah.
And without being too personal, but that's kind of like a sort of interesting awakening that happened for me months after that ironically or paradoxically allowed me to sleep again. It allowed me to rest in a different way. Do you know what I mean?
I do. And knowing a little bit story, sleep's been part of the story.
It is
because part of the story of healing is sleep. And like we can go back to the Asclepian and the laying and the Abaton and the sense of the sleep as an invitation to go into the unconscious world. Or even we can go and take good old Hermes wand and he puts us to sleep in order to learn sometimes.
Yeah.
All that rote learning out there is going to put us to sleep. We need some other kind of learning. So I wanted to go back to that image that you mentioned about the Asclepian healing ritual and how healing has been part of what's called you to this work, because that's where where we strongly identify, because to me astrology is an art of healing, or belongs to the art of healing.
Yeah.
And so in order to get there, how do we then hold on to the mysteries, the stories that keep telling us these rich images that you are referring to as you speak about, both the eighth and the ninth houses, if that makes sense.
Mm.
How do you imagine that we hold the richness of, because they slip away. What happens when our sleep is just a slumber of falling asleep or a being ignorant? What's the difference? How do we make a difference between those two?
I just think that's such an important question, because like we talk about awakening and, like, which is also a conceptual idea, right? A frame.
Yeah.
becoming awake to certain things, seeing things clearly,
Yeah.
and yet something about dreaming is there to help us to become more awake. And so there's a lot of paradoxes down here, I find. And I think
Yeah.
making certain distinctions, for me, what helped in that, I think maybe a 2 or 3 month journey after that Raven story and the boy falling asleep on the tar or whatever it was like a mound of a mound of tan, a mound of tan that was left over from alchemical process, right?
Yeah.
Sort of leather, and he just kept falling asleep there. And
Yeah.
the raven would
Yeah.
come, and then she'd just go, oh, fuck, he's falling asleep again. Um, it's
Yeah.
like it's like what's the difference that we're tracking um, inside of that? What is the difference between the sleep that he's in, the slumber that he's in
Easy. Mm,
on the tan, and
mm.
the deep dreaming that helps us to see things as they really are? I think this is kind of a Neptune question to me, a Pisces question, maybe, you know, like something that connects us with the ocean,
Yeah.
the old blind seers or whatever, you know, that it to me, it takes us into that paradoxical land of inquiry.
Well, it also, as you describe it, though, he's fallen asleep outside the alembic because all the tan is what's left over from the alchemical process.
Yeah.
Perhaps we're invited inside, but how many of us can stand the heat of that and
Right.
staying in the heat. As you described your personal story of the eighth house, it feels like you stayed in the heat for a couple of months. You
Hmm.
didn't fall, you didn't have slumber outside the Olympic. You were inside the Olympic, which
Well,
feels very much.
I would say that I had to take my sleepiness. I had to take my slumbering giant into the Olympic, as you said. You know, that's actually what needed to burn away, is what in craniosacral we call dross energy,
Yes. Yeah.
which is just it's more stagnancy, and it doesn't actually allow you to be fully awake or fully asleep. It
Mm.
doesn't allow
Mm.
you to transition. And I think, like, we talk about the cusps a lot, and the cusps I found to be this sort of hidden gem in this journey, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because those cusps of the houses, wow. I mean, you know, think about
Yeah.
the conversations I had with like V. Voldem and Libby Rose Wade, and the
Mm.
stories that they told, and the fifth house stuff that was there,
Yeah.
right? That was very much out of the fourth into the fifth. Um, you know, this is something that you and Glennis both talk about, like the Beatles song, She's Leaving Home, as a cusping fourth to fifth song,
Yeah.
right?
It's that powerful transition where we do leave home. It's an archetypal process. We all must leave home. The way you described third into fourth was like, how do we actually, boom, get right down to the deepest home? And then we have to leave it, so we're always coming back to the fourth and then leaving it. So we're always
Yeah.
making that transition. But yeah, I find that cusp between the fourth and the fifth is also the transfer of loyalties. We risk in the fifth transferring our loyalties to somebody outside the home,
Yeah.
somebody outside that deep, deep container inside of us. Oh yeah, so that was great. You had two very um, dynamic women speak about that.
Yeah.
Persephone and the sense of pleasure and all that is part of what is our um what which is part of our self-expression.
Yeah.
Fifth out, so
Yeah.
simple.
Yeah.
So simple. Yeah, so let's think about those cusps too. And because then, if we're at the cusp between the eighth and the ninth, and we're climbing those mountains in the ninth, by the time you got to the top of the chart, how did you feel? The top of the wheel, the top of,
Yeah. I mean, what an extraordinary sort of set of culminations I felt happened up there in the 10th, in a
Mhm.
way, because I
Mhm.
got to speak to a few of my heroes,
Oh
a
God.
few, a few of my own personal, I
Yeah.
guess if I think about how I relate to the MC, or how I used to relate before this journey, but still, I think it still stands true as like the people I admire. Um, and I have such an admiration for Thomas More and Michael Mead, and to have them come in and talk to me and engage in this material so beautifully and openly and fully, and that was so powerful to have those guys come in. And then the 10th house episode was also, we talked about the ninth house episode. I think the 10th house was another click for me in the journey, where there was something about the image of the oak that came through it as a 10th house image, and all those branches they're going through all those wounding processes and then opening out again, and then wounding and opening out, and the reach of the branches and the leaves and the trees, and
Mm.
that root system that was taking us down through the icy, and feeling the whole thing about how it's not just about getting rooted. The reach down is also a reach up. And then can we have that courage to reach out into the world, however it is, and engage in it? And I felt there was something very potent about that. And that episode as well was something that and it happened a few times along the journey where I had recorded an episode, and in listening back to it, I was like, this isn't it. And so then I had to record again. And that episode was in Perth, back in my hometown, and it was at 4 a.m. and I just woke up with the muses just like hammering at my ear saying, now it's time to record this one. And it was on the day I was flying back to Bali, and I just got up at 4 and made myself a cuppa, and I sat down and I just hit record, and well, let's see what the muses have to say. And so it was very much like led by them on that, in that episode. So, but it was giving, there's something happened in that 10th house that felt very, I don't know, maybe stabilizing of the whole journey or something like that. I don't know, something of the oak. And as you know, I'd just been researching the Dodona and the oak tree, the talking oak, the oak as oracle, the tree as oracle, which I really relate to as a felt sense.
Yeah. And part of that oak, the Dodona oak, of course, was used for the for the for the Argo, for the prow of the Argo, and it was the oracular. They could speak. but but as you were speaking about the great oak and the branches and the leaves, I was reminded of so many stories of having passed through a very critical time of life, be it a very difficult medical condition or a divorce or a death of somebody. How many stories take us to the mountains and the trees, and how many people find incredible sustenance and healing from the tree. And as you've been speaking, I'm looking out my front window at this beautiful flowering gum tree that right around this time of the equinox, all the parrots come back, these green parrots, and they squawk like mad from 4 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
Because 4 o'clock is don't forget the rising of the sun. So you were getting up there just as the sun gets into that first house and starts to rise. And the muses were like those parrots. And I think that in the trees, be they a Dodona oak or any tree, we hear the voices of the birds.
Yeah.
And so yeah. So I think that you've sort of crafted this process so beautifully. And yes, to have Tom Moore, what a lovely man to be able to speak. And of course, Michael Mead as well. But that to me shows a kind of quality, not just of these men, but a quality of you, that they would do this for you. And the quality of what the 10th and the 11th house are qualities not about, here I am in the world, I've sold all these books, because they didn't say any of that.
No.
It was qualities of being in the world and being of the world and being leaders in the world. And I think that was a great example of 10th and 11th houses of how one is able to just be in the world, if that makes sense. So I think you did those very, very well. What else comes to mind as we're speaking? Have we missed out on going back on some of
Well,
the
I guess
house?
that, well, we may have missed certain
Mhm.
things. Of course, Cameron Allen, it
Yeah,
feels like long ago, came and
yeah,
joined me for
yeah,
the second and the
yeah,
third.
yeah.
And
I was just thinking about him when you said that, just because of the
yeah,
second.
yeah,
Like,
that he was wonderful as a
yeah,
guest.
yeah,
So much vibrancy, and the way that he talked about the third house as it was almost like he was remembering that, oh yeah, I need to wander around in the nighttime. I need to wander around in my night world a bit more, and that
yeah,
and that
yeah,
gave me a lot. Like that third house episode in particular gave me a lot more to consider about the third than,
mm-hmm.
siblings and higher and lower
Yeah,
education, I guess, or early education,
right.
and
Yeah,
the environment around you. It's like, well, yes, that, but like, what is that? What are those dreams of that place? And
yeah,
that being in the night world consciousness down there where we do our learning. And
yeah,
just learning in itself is such an interesting thing. I mean, as I told you last week, I'm currently learning Greek because I'm going to be spending half my year in Greek, which is very exciting. Um, that's starting very, very soon. And in the learning process, I had a teacher and she's a great teacher. We got along so well, but we got the textbook. And as soon as we got the textbook, it was like I just couldn't learn. And I felt myself regressing into this boy who had to be naughty or something. You know what I mean? It's like, I, this is not my life phase. What is happening here? But I realized in and then I discovered this thing called language transfer. And the guy teaching that is able to, firstly, he just states that like we need to move through that trauma of being forced to rote learn things.
yeah,
And instead we got to embrace our curiosity. And if you allow your curiosity to come forward into the learning of the language, you'll just start to fill it out inside of your consciousness because your consciousness and your curiosity is going around and researching and looking and that was very third house to me
yeah,
of like, of course, like children learn language. In
yeah,
fact, a
yeah,
friend from home put two of it has two daughters, right? One daughter decided because they were going to Greece or was it Italy? I can't remember. But one daughter got on Duolingo and went hard at it and every day was learning the Duolingo way. And one daughter was just like, oh, just being around it. And when they got to whichever country it was, the youngest daughter just started speaking it with everybody. And the oldest daughter was completely stuck.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's a kind of what, dichotomy, would that be the right word? Paradox might be another word. I think we find paradoxes in all these houses. But the paradox, of course, of the third house, in the ancients must have known something when they put the joy of the moon there,
Yeah. Yeah.
like that. And also, they knew something. Of course, they knew something because, of course, the third house is as the sun is moving from its lowest point, up. So it begins it begins the journey up, and that's, I think, also speaking to the 4 o'clock waking up of you. You're on a journey up from the lowest part. So the third house, if you just kind of take it, let's say it takes us from midnight or whatever to about 2 in the morning, which is oftentimes when we have the very rich dreams, isn't it,
Mm.
around this time? But that sense of the moon there, and yeah, so what you were saying about Cameron, in the night, it is very much the night learning. But the paradox, I think, is we always think of the third house as material,
Right. Yeah.
and I guess in a way it is, but it's also highly, highly lunar, highly, as you said, it's not about learning, but technically it's about learning from the atmosphere that we're in, and so that's very powerful.
I think there's that sort of Hermes in his interaction with the tortoise. Like it's something that I spent a lot of time in that myth, as you know. The Homeric hymn to Hermes is one of our favorites, I think. But his interaction with the tortoise and then turning it into music and then singing of the muses and singing of Mnemosyne, that's an origin story he likes to go back to rather than this big
Absolutely.
war and all of the shit that
Right.
happened between those titans and everything. Like he talks about Mnemosyne. It's like, well, if we're really going to go back to the origin, let's go back to Mnemosyne, cellular memory. And I
Yeah,
think
that's
that's
right.
very moon third, mercurial,
Yeah,
hermetic.
yeah, yeah,
And I can feel
absolutely.
myself like not learning Greek, but remembering it. And I really just needed a teacher that could say like, hey, you know this language. It's already in English. English is just a byproduct of this language. And sort of taking me through English to get to Greek, you know?
Yeah. Well, and also to like and to free yourself. Maybe I'm freeing myself rather than yourself. I'm projecting here, but to free yourself from the pronunciation as well.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
To free yourself from the pronunciation, because it's like that. Maybe that'll come too as we hear it. And some people have better ears than others, but I mean that's fate in itself.
Mm.
So, so as we were moving now, we've moved. What I'm feeling here is the interest too. We've talked about the cusps, but let's talk for a moment about the kind of oppositions, because we've gone from also the 10th, the 10th and the ninth down to the third. So how do you feel about those oppositions? Like as you were in, say, the 10th house, you've already spoken about that, how the fourth came up. So when you're in the third house, does the ninth come up, or how do you feel about that?
Well, I think on the journey, it was interesting because once I got to the seventh, I could start to really experience the oppositions. And I think if you notice that, if you've listened, I really start to bring in oppositions from the seventh, which is kind of perfect, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
I got one of the great images actually that really resounded for me was Snow White at the window with the witch, and there's the white maiden and the red witch, and the white side of the apple is facing the red witch, and the red side of the apple is facing the white maiden, and they're at the window. They're at a mirror, and that's the mirror on the wall. And I think it's that profound image that we get lost because everything becomes Disneyified and it becomes live action remakes and all this bullshit. But at that window is that mirror of the red and the white and the maiden and the older lady, and they're looking at each other. They're looking right at each other. And that's one of the many, many archetypal oppositions at play in these fairy tales, in these stories, right? And I think it's that mirroring that goes on, not just first, seventh, because that's the most obvious mirror of the self-other. But all of these houses end up having this beautiful mirroring process. And you can see when you move back and forward between them where you're at on that, where there might be some medicine in the opposition.
Yeah.
And
Always.
and there's always, we've talked ever since I first started talking to you, Brian, 5 or so years ago, about the 6 paradoxes of astrology. That's what I sort of, without saying it out loud, although I have now, like that's what I kind of base my work on, is the excitement that comes up in me when I see the archetypal oppositions, because it just shows reality. It like turns reality on its head, This is why that half white, half red apple feels so wonderful. It's poisonous on one side, but there must be medicine on the other, or maybe medicine in both sides. I don't know.
Well, well, we don't need to know, do we?
Don't need to know. Yeah.
We don't need to know. Because it does happen. But I think paradox is such a powerful word to speak about all of astrology, because the paradox is in the opposition, but it's also every house has a relationship with every other house in the kind of ecosystem of the astrology. And I was just thinking about Jung's idea, and then this is probably more of a German word, so I'm going to pronounce it very badly. But he talked about the rhizomes, which of course aren't really roots. They're more like those, like irises have. They send along the ground and shoots come up from that. And to me, like every house kind of sends out these kind of things and is connected to everything else, every planet, every sign. So it's all connected, but very clearly, I think we can see those oppositions. But what I remember about the seventh house was that you came for the only time in these 39 sessions that you've had before. You actually came to my house.
Yeah.
And so that was pretty good for a seventh house.
That was wonderful, Brian. We got to sit exactly where you are now, but in person. And around all of your books and in your office space, and with Rufus around as well, and Glennis all with her leg up and having gone through her surgeries and all of the different things going on. To be in person there. And you know what's funny? I don't know if I told you this, but the Airbnb I had a wall of mirrors. Did I tell you
Yes,
that?
you told me that. Yeah.
A wall of
But
mirrors.
but again, I think what we're coming full circle in some way because what you mentioned at the beginning was about how very important it was for you to be involved in this process with others.
Yeah.
So and that's what makes it comes alive. It's a process we share, and I feel so much gratitude for being able to have people like yourself in my life who are able to share on that level. So I shouldn't say that, but I'm about to. that that not many others all share.
Hmm.
So to me, that was a very important part of that particular thing. But also too, I guess the seventh house, first house, that sense of, as you said, the beginning of another sense of reflective journey.
Yeah.
By the time now we have the incredible, um, what can we say, tools to help us reflect on where we've been again. So as I guess we're moving towards a kind of sense of tying this up, how would you like to? It's not quite ended,
Hmm.
but maybe before we end it, let's go back to the 39 episodes. Um, is that special for you? 39. We've done 39 episodes of the houses, and there's one more to come, isn't there? There's an epilogue to
Yeah.
come.
Yeah. I mean, the 39 is it's so wonderful that you went back and found that out and added that up and did the maths, because
I did.
like it's a 3 and a 9 in that 3-9
Yeah.
opposition, and then it's also when you put it together, 3 plus 9 is 12. That's up to 3. So you've
Yeah.
got a lot of threes there, and there's that sense of cuspness to that. There's that sense of dynamism to the number 3. It sort of brings me into the a feeling of being not quite complete. And that's such a delicious place. I mean, that's the third and the sixth and the ninth and the
Yeah.
12th as well, isn't it? It's like not
Yeah.
quite,
Yeah.
almost you're completing, but you're not complete. And I love being able to talk with you now because I still have one more fairy tale to make it a 40, which is that's a 4. That's a wrap. Once we get
That's
to
a
that,
wrap.
that's
It is a
done.
wrap. It's your wrap. It's the quaternity.
It's the
Well, it's
quaternity.
interesting when you talked about the 3 and the 9, because what comes to my mind, well, I'll tell you how it comes to my mind. It came to my mind because I think somewhere along the way I remember that there's 39 books in the Old Testament.
Oh,
So I
okay.
think there are, because
Yeah.
there was a movie also called 39 Steps, which was based on something, but I think there's also 39. But I can't tell you if that's true or not. So I thought of all my Gemini being so involved in trivia and how all of a sudden there's all this trivia. But trivia is an
Mm.
interesting one because it's trivia. It's 3 ways.
Mm.
You know, it's Hecate she was trivial because she was the goddess of the 3 ways.
Yeah.
And so trivia, so again, the threeness of it all, the 3 ways, which was always so very important in terms of, I think of in terms of unconscious processes for sure. So how do we then, or is it even necessary? I guess I always feel it is, to kind of say, you will in your next episode do a wrap, but how can we do a wrap here?
That's a big question. I love this. I'd never looked at trivia as 3 ways
Oh,
before. That's
oh.
wonderful. Trivia. That's a different take on trivia. I
Well,
want to, yeah.
yeah, she's Hecate,
Mm.
who stands like the goddess of the 3 ways. So I always think of her, when I kind of berating myself for for things that aren't that important, I think of her.
And I think about the three heads of Cerberus, and I think about
Yeah.
that wonderful book Where Three Roads Meet. I think you might have put
Oh,
me onto that book.
oh, it's just a marvelous book. Um, and and also, of course, what you said at the beginning, the three fates.
Three Fates, yeah, indeed.
Mm, mm.
And the grouping of threes of these houses as well. I can
Yeah,
feel all
that's
of
right.
that. I
Oh,
guess before we
absolutely.
move into the wrapping up, I just want to give a shout out to those not mentioned that helped out as well. We had Colette Davis, who joined me at the last minute to talk about the third house and the sibling dynamics through the story of Hansel and Gretel. We met up to talk about that one just before going on the epic pilgrimage in Greece to the sacred sites in June last year. To Kira Sutherland, who brought her knowledge of medical astrology to the sixth house. And Kira and I will actually be joining forces later in the year to combine the mythic and the medical in a new offering. So stay tuned for that. And then Jason Holly, a mutual friend of ours, Brian, who joined me, and the monkey that was at my home in Ubud, far from the forest, to explore in such depth the field of collective consciousness of the 11th house. That episode had a way of opening up that house for us both that we hadn't really experienced before. And yeah, and Jason and I actually, now that I think about it, are just about to launch our second venture together, exploring the ancient texts of Ovid's Metamorphoses. And then I'll just say that one of the great surprises of the podcast was Ryan Nielsen, who's now a good
Mm,
friend.
yeah.
And he reached out to me because he wanted to talk about Alalira and he felt that
Mm,
he got to the podcast by searching about soul. He's just searched into Google about soul stories and astrology or something like that. And he found you and me talking about the first six houses. And from that, he got really into the podcast and to the point where he's actually a friend of V. Oldham's as well. So some
mm,
ways
yeah.
that the threads connect.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and his sharing on Alalira was so wonderful, and I loved the bounce that we had for each other. So I brought him back for the 12th,
Mm.
the 11th, 12th cusp of the
Yeah.
Iron John, Iron Hans,
The
and
wild man is the helper.
oh my goodness, oh my
Yeah.
goodness, yeah. I mean, it's so great. Those I loved exploring because that story feels so embedded in the mythopoetic
Mm.
men's movement and the
Yeah.
Robert Bly's work because it was so profound. But to
Yeah.
pull it out of that back into the collective commons, um,
Yeah.
and and I think I would like to speak to that to the collective well the commons, the commonwealth,
Yeah.
because we're in such a mindset that everything should belong to people, and that's not
Mm.
where this podcast comes from. Like I come from that I want to explore what is common to us, the wealth that we have, the wealth of soul that's been left behind, not so someone that can profit from it, but so that we can all profit in our own way. We can all become prophets of it by connecting to the wealth underneath. And that is common. That's the creative commons that I draw from, and I encourage all of us to draw from, and to not feel shy about it, not feel squeamish about drawing from the collective commons. I feel passionate about that, as you can see, because I feel like that's where we connect to soul through the stories left behind by our ancestors, and our ancestors didn't want this to become um, belonging to a few.
No. No. No, because they told us of life that's interconnected. Go back to the oak, the soul of the oak, the spirit that speaks in the oak, all of life,
Yeah,
all of life. But it is, I guess, Chris, very important to acknowledge too that the times that we sit in and are in, um, that we can perhaps find such a solace and soul in these particular stories, in these ways. And that's what makes us rich.
yeah,
That's
mm,
where the riches are. And so it's like very interesting because once you find those particular riches, those particular stories, those particular ways of being, one doesn't have the drive that one used to
Yeah, interesting.
for those kind of worldly things because they're given to you. They're all part of who we are. So um, I now would also like to um, um, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm looking for a word which is happening more and more, I think. But I will just put that down to the aging process. Acknowledge is the word I'm looking for. I'd like to also acknowledge all the patrons and your listeners
Yeah,
and the people who join with you,
yeah.
because it is in that community that we find these kind of riches. And this community that we have is so very valuable in supporting this way of being in the world. So I think I want to acknowledge the listeners and of what you do, because really they are tuning in to that other way of knowing, you know,
Mm.
the soul, I guess we can call it.
Yeah, you always have a beautiful way of exploring the word audience that I've always appreciated, and that relationship to audience, and maybe you can speak to that.
Well, the audience is that way of being heard. It's audio. That's how that sense of it's not an audience. They're all not here to listen to you, Chris. That's what I
Exactly.
want to
Yeah. Yeah.
say.
Thank God.
But they're they're all here to hear their own voice through yours. It's like you're the
Hmm.
storyteller. It's like whenever if I write about, I like to say, if I'm writing, say something, let's say writing about, it was you speaking of the Argos, or no, you weren't. You're speaking of metamorphosis, but let's just take Jason and the Argo. So as Jason speaking through Pindar or somebody like, voices speak in ways, through the speaker. So as you're speaking, as you're telling the stories, there's all of the gods and images and that are speaking, and
Hmm.
those are what the audience are hearing. So that's the sense of what an audience to me is. It's from the sense of audio, to hear, to listen, and
Hmm.
so we listen to you because we hear the stories of life. And
Hmm.
so now it's my great honor to say, well, thank you for doing that, and thank you on behalf of your audience, for doing that.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you. I do want to acknowledge that and thank the audience, especially. Well, thank you, because ultimately we're saying you, who is the listener right now, it's quite a singular experience, and that's the odd thing about this platform, right? Because it's like I build relationships with people that I don't know the people that I'm building relationship with. It's a very curious and interesting thing, right? But it is a relationship that is built, and a conversation that is being had, and I'm aware that that conversation is being had. I don't have to be totally conscious of it, but I'm aware of that conversation. So thank you for being on the other side of this, to you who is listening, to be in that conversation with me, and to be in that conversation more so with soul, because that was the point of, that's why it's on the soul's terms. That's why um, we want to bring earth and water to a dry, parched land of inanimism. We want to bring animism, with this way of reflecting on the internally, external, like reflecting on reality itself, reflecting on this ensouled place. And as you mentioned there, I just want to reiterate that thank you to the patrons who showed support over this time. It's been so wonderful, not just in some financial support, because this is all done essentially, just off my own bat. I'm never going to advertise, so that any money that I make is just from the patrons. But also, even deeper than that, to the interactions that we've had over there, some really rich interactions and some reflections from the patrons that have come on, and I just, I love that. I love when there's reflection. I love, because the one thing I don't have is a live audience to hear, like, where did that touch you? If we were in a group, I would tell a story, but then I'd get really curious of, where did that where do you feel yourself in this story? What happened in your body? Where did it take you in your life? Where did it take you in your psyche? That's questions that I am unable to ask apart from when I have a guest and the two of us are going through it. But there's a field of there's an untapped field of rich responses that I am aware of, you know, but that I can't inquire into because it's a transmission. Unfortunately, it's a transmission. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, on another level, you're connected in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much for being both a guest and a host, which come from the same words, which is where we also are going to get words like wholeness.
Mm.
Isn't it? Um, so I would thank you so much for that, Chris, and for everyone listening. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to catch Chris's last podcast on the houses. And given that, I think what we might do is also say or ask, what's next?
Thank you for asking that, Brian. What is next? Well, to be honest, next is I'm going to take some time just to have input rather than output. You know, like I think there's been such an output here. I need some time just to relax the voice a little bit and relax the output that's going on here, relax the effort of all of that, and just take some time to just soak up the silence a bit more for the next few months. But that said, the idea, at least, not necessarily the plan, but the idea and the concept is to come back in around Cancer season and start into the planets and starting with the moon. And my dream of that is to not only do it as a podcast, but also have a group going with me through that get to experience the podcast, but then join me in reflection and join me in, so I can actually create a little pod, a little Argonaut that can wander that journey with me as well. So that's as I said, a concept and an idea. There will be metamorphoses with Jason Holly, so that's also coming up. There's just three magical 3-number spots left in that. And your other friend and I guess student or colleague or however you define her, Amanda Simon, and I will be launching something we're calling Astropoesis, which has the feeling of the morphic as well, because I think this is the times that we're in and the things that I want to speak into. And that'll come later in the year. So there's a few things cooking and brewing in the background. The threads are being woven. But for the next little section, I'm just going to be quiet for a while.
Right, right. And we don't want to have a 13th fairy, so we need to also mention Amanda, because she was
Oh
part
my
of it.
goodness, Amanda.
Amanda, and she did you two did such a wonderful job on the ninth house. You took us into realms beyond the realms, and so yeah, so thanks to Amanda. And I think when I did my statistics, I found I can't find. Oh yeah, there was actually had 13 guests. Now there was 19 episodes with guests in them, but there was 13 of them because some were doubled up. And so Amanda, she ends up being the 13th fairy, but we didn't forget her.
We didn't forget you, Amanda. We brought you right into the very fold of things right at the end here.
Yeah. Well, that's so important. Chris, God bless, and have this incredible journey to Greece. Something you deserve, but something you'll also pleasure and value forever.
Thank you so much, Brian. And thank you for a wonderful job at being host of On the Soul's Terms. Excellent work.
Thank you. From the expert.
But no, I don't. Just to add to that, I just want to really appreciate. I want to show some appreciation here. You're going to have to just breathe and soak it up, okay? Because you know, as I said, it was like around 5 years ago that I picked up your book, Soul Symbol Imagination, and while I was reading it, only a few chapters in, I said to myself, this is the kind of astrology that I want to learn, but not just astrology. This is talking about the soul. This is talking about psyche on a level that I can really deeply relate to. And so I looked at the back of the book and I saw your email address and I sent you an email and you responded with a very in-depth email response that had looked through my whole website and read my articles and looked at what I was up to. And there was so much more than I had ever anticipated receiving back from you. And in the end, we've become, I don't know, you've become such a dear friend and mentor, someone that I can talk the soul with, but also just have like silly conversations with every now and again as well. And, like we can relate on so many levels. And I cherish you, Brian. You've made such an enormous difference in my life. Thank you you've come on the show so many times. You've showed so much support for what I do and who I am. And I just want to really acknowledge you and say a deep thank you from the bottom of my heart and from the listeners. Yeah. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Yeah. And please come on again when we're in the planets.
Yeah. Well, that'll be wonderful because you're going to return to the planets in a whole different way.
Yeah.
And allow them to speak.
Yeah. No doubt.
Allow them to have a voice. Allow them to speak through you so that we can hear something new.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thanks again, Brian. Really been special to have you in our own little trilogy, in our trivia.
In our trivia, yeah. Well, but anyway, yeah. So watch it. I may get my own podcast now.
I know.
That's what
Now now you're ready. Now you have experience for the CV.
Oh yeah, that's it. The master has told me that I'd be okay doing it. I doubt it. Can't see me doing that, but I will definitely be there to support you in any ways that you need it.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for listening to On the Soul's Terms podcast. To support the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review, sharing with friends, or becoming a patron at patreon.com/onthesoulsterms. Until next time.